Okay, I'd like to introduce David Bassett. He's been here at the museum for about 20 years. He has geology degrees, a bachelor and a master's degree, and that's a towering achievement in my books. And the main thing is he has survived. I mean, he is a veteran of 30 years of Christian education. And he's been head of the science department at Ovilla Christian School for, was it 20 years now, or almost 20?
For past 20 years now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I've read some of his writings. I'd like to read more. I'd like to chase after him and make a lot of videos of what his research, because he's really got a lot of good things to say. Be skeptical. Check him out. Check out the sources. I think you'll find what he has to say to be trustworthy. And remember, Scriptures teach us to be skeptical. Scripture says, test everything, hold on to the good.
Mm-hmm.
So, David?
Thank you. That's true. Be a Berean, right? Creation has answers. This is the topic of the overriding topic of the whole year here at the Creation Evidence Museum, if this is your first time to visit. Every month we have a different live lecture on a certain theme. This is our theme of this year, that creation has answers. A lot of people who are not real familiar with creation science think that creationists, all they do is just basically slam evolution or argue against evolution, but they don't realize that creation scientists do original creation research, and they publish in creation journals, and they actually do field work, those kind of things as well. And it's true that the evolutionists are probably much better funded than creationists are, and we may piggyback on some of their research. That's okay, but we have a totally different interpretation usually of the data, especially where time is concerned. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Creation has answers, deep time and deep space. Deep time is basically just the terminology for millions and billions of years. And I'm sure all of us have heard that phrase before, okay? Millions and billions of years. And so we just lump that up into this term, deep time. Deep space, this is basically outer space region that's more than hundreds of light years away. There are two different ways that astronomers calculate the distance to stars. The first is the more exact geometric way, which is called parallax. And this is used for stars that are only hundreds of light years away. You can actually tell the change in position, the apparent shift in position, if they're that close. And we'll talk more about what a light year is in just a moment. The farther stars use a different method called the apparent magnitude method, which is based on how bright the star appears to be from Earth, from the distance from Earth. And this uses a star called a Cepheid variable there. So there are basically two different ways to calculate distance. When we start with Genesis here in verse 14 of Genesis chapter 1, the creation passage, and God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." There. I want to focus on this phrase, the firmament of the heaven there. What's actually being talked about there? The firmament of the heaven. What is a firmament there? If you look up this word in the Old Testament, in the original Hebrew text, using a concordance, something like that, a Bible reference tool, you find out it's the Hebrew word rakia. We usually spell it R-A-Q-I-A. Some people spell it R-A-Q-I-Y-A. There, they transliterate it that way. And it's used 17 times in the Old Testament, in 15 different verses. 4 books of the Bible mention this term. Genesis, of course, Psalms, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And you won't find the term anywhere else in the Old Testament there. When you look up the words in the context, you get an idea that a firmament is either a space or a face, a surface there. The word actually means a spread out thinness, or it comes from the verb rakah, to pound or to beat with a hammer into a thin metal sheet. So we can actually cause metal to be extremely thin, high density. but very thin and spread out, or we can actually spread something out and make it thin by stretching it out and causing the density to decrease. Okay, so we can actually do it two different ways, a space or a face. Now, the spaces Scripture calls heavens. And how many heavens are there according to the Bible? Anybody know? Any guesses on that? There are 3, right? Now, years ago, there was a TV show called Seventh Heaven, right? Which is in the Quran, mentioned in the Quran, by the way. Even though the show featured a Christian family, and the Christian pastor was, of course, the head of the family, that particular show. But the title of the show is not a biblical title. Okay, there are 3 heavens, you're correct. There. 2 Corinthians 12, verse 2 talks about the 3rd heaven. Interestingly, the heavens are numbered from earth outward, okay, which tells you how important earth is. The first space would be Earth's atmosphere. This is called in Genesis 1:20 the open firmament of heaven, that the birds or fowls of day 5 fly within. So that tells us we're talking about Earth's atmosphere. The second heaven would be the outer space region. We're going to be focusing on that one today. And then, of course, third heaven, the one that's mentioned in 2 Corinthians 12:2, refers to God's throne, the activity around God's throne. Okay, what we typically think of when we think of capital H, heaven, there. Well, these 3 spaces, these 3 heavens, have got to be divided so that to keep one from merging into another. And that's done by 2 metallic or crystalline constructs, 2 solid dividers, which are the faces between first heaven and second heaven and third heaven. Now, we no longer have the divider between first heaven and second heaven. This, what Dr. Baugh, his model, calls the canopy, which collapsed at the time of the flood. Now our atmosphere just merges right out into outer space there. But Ezekiel chapter 1 does still talk about the sea of glass or crystal there, past the edge of second heaven to the north, that God's throne is anchored in. Okay, and that's also mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 10. So the firmament of the heaven there, talking about second heaven, I believe. This is the heaven, I believe, of day 2, Genesis 1, 6 through 8. And notice that the lights are put in the firmament of the heaven, okay, in this medium, this space medium within this particular region. And it has 5 purposes, according to verse 15 and 16. To divide the day from the night, let them be for signs, for seasons, for days, for years. And then the next verse says, let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And Dr. Bosch stressed this morning, I was going to do the same thing this afternoon, the prepositional phrase there, upon the earth. There, when you think about distant stars that are trillions of miles away, their purpose, one of their purposes is for their light to be given to the earth there, to give light upon the earth. And then notice the next phrase, let's not forget that. And it was so. Probably that very day, maybe that very moment there when God said, let them give their light upon the earth, and it was so. So either light speed must be going extremely fast, almost infinitely fast, much faster than we measure it today there, or there's some stretching involved, which we'll be talking about, which actually changes time. And God made 2 great lights, verse 16 says, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Genesis 1, 14 through 16. Okay, we typically assume the greater light is the sun, and the lesser light is the moon, and we probably have good reason for doing that. Interestingly, the Bible never identifies the sun as a star. It always says the sun, moon, and stars. Here it says greater light, lesser light, and then made the stars also. Okay? But our astronomers do classify our sun, of course, as a star. It says he made the stars. He didn't create them in this verse. Okay? The word create, made, and formed, slightly different in meaning there in the Hebrew. That's because the raw material for stars was already in existence on day 1 as part of the heaven there. So here's the introduction. One of the major criticisms offered against the creation model is the problem of vast time having transpired in deep space, an old universe. But if the data are aligned factually and properly, just like dividing the Word of God, accurately, the problem is resolved in favor of creation. Actually, the Genesis account of creation in the Holy Bible is the only document that describes the absolute origin of the universe and all things contained therein. Okay? So this phrase, the absolute origin, that's an important phrase also. It's also called an ultimate origin, and in science we call those things a singularity. It's a one-time only happening there. The origin of the earth would have been a one-time only happening. The origin of the earth, the origin of life, the origin of man. These are non-repeatable events, and so they're outside the realm of the scientific method. Their scientific method deals with repeatable regularities in the present. And we're talking about one-time only events of the past, okay, which had no human observers when these things came to be. And so without the first chapters of Genesis 1 to 11 specifically, we would be clueless as to the origin of all those things, as to the origin of sin, as to the origin of death, as to the origin of marriage. Why do we wear clothes? These are answers that are given to us in the first 11 chapters of Genesis and nowhere else. Okay, this is the source of truth, and this is the seed plot of the Bible. All Christian doctrines find their root there in the first chapters of Genesis. And this is why Genesis is probably the most frequently attacked book of the Bible in our society. All other cosmogonies begin with a universe already in existence in some form. There's a difference between the word cosmogony and the word cosmology. Cosmology is the systematic scientific study of the cosmos, of the universe. Astronomy would be part of cosmology there. A cosmogony is a philosophy. It's a worldview, opinion about the origin of the universe there. The secular, one popular secular cosmogony we're going to be talking about is the Big Bang idea. There was no human observers present. There were no scientists actually taking real measurements with equipment and data and performing experiments on the origin of the universe. This is a philosophical idea about the origin of the universe. In the beginning, God created. We accept that by faith as our cosmogony, a biblical cosmogony. Okay? Philosophy and science are both trying to do the same things, just differently. They're both seeking after truth, aren't they? Philosophies are seeking after truth, but they're not bound by observation. Science has that restriction. Science has to be based on observation in the present. So when we're talking about cosmogonies, we're talking about something that's not based on observation, and in this case, dealing with the origin of the universe. The Bible's six-day creation scenario is assaulted by the evolutionary theory that envisions vast time, deep time, in the natural development of the universe from an imaginary Big Bang. I have some well-meaning students that have given me, on two separate occasions, the same bumper sticker that says, "I believe in the Big Bang. God spoke and bang, it happened." There. I don't have that on my car though, because I don't want people to think that as a Christian that I'm supporting the Big Bang idea, the Big Bang that's supposedly taking place almost 14 billion years ago. I don't want to send that message. Okay, and again, I know that they're well-meaning, but a Big Bang is an explosion, and explosions scientifically through observation in the present create disorder. And yet the word cosmos is the Greek word for orderly arrangement. It's the opposite of the Greek word chaos, which means a disorderly arrangement. I'm wondering if my students' bedrooms, are they cosmoses or are they chaoses? I wonder. But we never see an explosion create order. Contrary to secular interpretation, the earth and the heavens are observed to be young. And the key word is observed. Observed to be young, in the present. There's a evolutionary astrophysicist by the name of John Eddy, E-D-D-Y. He has a really interesting quote that creationists particularly are fond of, but you don't hear it too much in the secular literature. And he says that with some frantic recalculation, there's nothing in observational astronomy that would conflict with James Ussher's chronology for the age of the universe of 6,000 years. There's nothing in observational astronomy that would conflict with that. And this is what it's all about. It's based on observation. So let's look at Roman number 1 here. The Earth in space demonstrates a recent history. Planet Earth travels 66,000 miles per hour. Are you feeling it? We're part of the system that's doing that, right? As it orbits the sun, that specific speed perfectly offsets the sun's gravitational pull, keeps Earth's orbit the proper distance from the sun. If we were to actually revolve around the sun faster, we'd be getting too far away from the sun. Temperatures would drastically decrease. If we were spinning a little bit slower, Earth's gravitational pull would spiral us inward, getting us dangerously close, temperature increasing. We've got to be within the proper distance from the sun. This 91 to 94 million miles or so, 1 astronomical unit is where we are. Our moon's the same distance from the Earth, yet our moon seems to be lifeless. So this is not the only factor that helps support life on the Earth, as we're in what astronomers call the Goldilocks zone of the solar system. Not too hot, not too cold. We're just right temperature-wise, okay? And they actually do use the term Goldilocks zone, okay? Earth's magnetic field is affected by the sun's rays, and any significant disruption of the Earth-Sun magnetic balance would bear consequences. Evidence for extraordinarily rapid changes in the geomagnetic field, Earth's magnetic field, during a reversal in the recent past has now been published in mainline secular literature. So this is actually information that supports the creation interpretation of data. Again, observational data in the present. Extraordinarily rapid changes, it says there in boldface. I actually went to I actually checked out the article that's cited here at the bottom, also cited in your handout there by Coe, Previtt, and Camps. And this is the title, New Evidence for Extraordinarily Rapid Change of the Geomagnetic Field During a Reversal. A reversal is where the magnetic polarity is opposite in direction. So rather than compasses pointing to the magnetic north, they'd point to the magnetic south. Okay? And this is the idea anyway. And then this is the, let me read you the abstract from the article that's cited here at the bottom. It says this: paleomagnetic results from lava flows recording a geomagnetic polarity reversal at Steens Mountain, Oregon, which is on the Oregon-California border, suggests the occurrence of brief episodes of astonishingly rapid field change of 6 degrees per day. Now, that's 1994-1995 research, 6 degrees per day change in the magnetic field orientation. Their first article that they published, these three, was back in 1984 to 1989, and that research showed 3 degrees of change. A decade later, they're now finding lava flows that indicated 6 degrees of change. And so they go on to say this: the evidence is large systematic variations in the direction of remnant magnetization as a function of the temperature, of thermal demagnetization, and a vertical position within a single flow, which are most simply explained by the hypothesis, this is the good part now, the last sentence of the abstract, their conclusion, that the field, the magnetic field, was changing direction as the flow cooled. So before the lava could even solidify, the magnetic field was changing direction. And that was preserved actually in the lava flow itself. He mentions here that this rate of change, the magnetic polarity transition recorded in the lava flow, had to be made in less than 2 weeks. Less than 2 weeks. About 50,000 times faster than the 2,000 plus years previously thought to be the theoretical minimum time for geomagnetic reversals. And they thought it took 2,000 years to reverse. And yet the data is saying, no, it takes less than 2 weeks to reverse. So if you do a little math and you look at the 2,000 years, how many weeks are in 2,000 years? 2,000 times 52 would be 104,000 weeks. Well, he said it was 2,000 times faster there. So divide that, or 50,000 times faster. So divide that by 50,000 and you get 2.08 weeks, which is 14 and a half days. So then he says the period of 15 days is undoubtedly an overestimate there. An astonishingly rapid rate of variation in the geomagnetic field direction of 3 degrees per day. So this is the end result here. This is the end of the article. So if the magnetic reversals have occurred in days and weeks, rather than thousands and millions of years, then the Earth's rock layers, in which there is a continuous sequence of these magnetic reversals, are by implication probably only thousands of years old. Thus, this data is important in establishing a young Earth there. And that's exactly what we would say. The work of the late Dr. Thomas Barnes, who is Professor Emeritus of Physics at University of Texas El Paso, where I got my bachelor's degree, indicates that the total energy in the Earth's magnetic field is decreasing with a half-life of 1,465 years, plus or minus 165 years. What's the half-life? Half-life is the time it takes for half of a radioactive isotope or some type of energy phenomena to decay in half there. So he's saying the magnetic field decays in half, is half of its strength every 1,465 years. When Dr. Barnes did this original research, he gathered all the magnetic field data from the very first time that the planet's magnetic field was calculated in 1835 by Carl Friedrich Gauss to 130 years after that, 1835 to 1965. 130 years of data. Every year we can calculate the Earth's magnetic field to see how it's changed from the year previously. Based on the 130 years of data, he then plotted a curve, allowed a computer to match that curve with an equation, and then extrapolate that curve backward in time there. And so we found out that the magnetic field has been decaying exponentially, been cut in half about he said originally every 1,400 years was the half-life. So that means if you go back in time 1,400 years, you would have to double the magnetic field strength. And then another 1,400 years, that number would double. And then another 1,400 years in the past, that number would double. And so you're getting stronger and stronger and stronger magnetic fields, which are actually putting more and more pressure on the Earth itself and on life on the Earth. And there's a limit to how much doubling you could actually do. How far back in time would you have to go for the planet itself to start breaking apart? For the crust and the mantle of the Earth to start becoming structurally compromised? How far back would you have to go? And they calculated that's about 7 to 10 half-lives there. Well, 7 times 1,400 is 9,800 years. So sometimes you'll hear people say, well, a young Earth creationist is defined as someone who believes in a 6,000 to 10,000 year Earth and universe there. The 6,000 year is based on biblical data, internally biblical data, like event-to-event chronology within the scriptures or genealogical evidence. That gives us close to 6,000 years. The most you could go biblically is 6,200 years. Did you know that? For the age of the Earth. About 6,200 years biblically. And the 10,000 years is the upper end of the range, is based on Dr. Barnes' research on the decay of the Earth's magnetic field. Because we're looking for a chronometer to date the planet. And the Earth's magnetic field surrounds the entire planet, and the Earth cannot be older than its magnetic field. So that puts an upper limit on things. Okay? Well, Earth actually would have been far less than 9,800 years, because living systems are much more fragile than inorganic systems there. And so we're moving our way down toward the biblical age of the Earth when we look at this particular data. The field at that rate, he says, would be considerably less than 20,000 years old, and date the Earth and its relationship to the Sun within that time frame. Well, how old did they say the Earth is? If you're teenage students who are going to college, secular college, let's say, and they were sitting in on a geology class similar to the ones I was sitting in when I was in college, what would they hear the professor say would be the age of the Earth, the accepted age of the Earth? Any ideas? 4.5 billion. Yep, they say about 4.6 billion. That's Tori back there. Okay, 4.6 billion years for the age of the Earth. For the age of the universe, they say that's closer to 14 billion years. 13.8 is what they're saying right now for the age of the universe. Okay, and of course from Scripture, the heaven and the earth are the same age, right? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth there. So already we have a discrepancy between these 2 points of view. Rock strata, thousands of feet thick, are sometimes bent and folded into hairpin shapes, very tight kinks there in the strata layers. And the evolutionary scenario, hundreds of millions of years are assumed to have transpired during the deposition of these folded layers. they say 1 inch takes 500,000 years to deposit. Okay? So 2 inches would be a full million years, according to the way they think there. Okay? And so if we have rock layers that are several feet thick, you can see where they're adding up the time, can't you? Where this deep time's coming from. Well, most rock is brittle. Dry rock is brittle. It can withstand tremendous compression stress, but when you try to pull a rock apart, it will snap there if the forces are great enough. How in the world are we going to be able to bend these layers into tight folds like this? The next slide tells us some important information. The folding occurred without cracking. Without cracking. If you look at the axis of the bends, there are no breaks in the rock. We call those joints. If there's movement on a break, it's called a fault. If there's no movement on a break, it's called a joint in geology. And the curves of these bends have no joints, have no cracks, with radii so small that the entire formation had to be still wet and unsolidified when the bending occurred. This implies that the folding occurred less than thousands of years after deposition. And since these are sedimentary rocks, they had to be deposited by water, okay, or in water. Earth history and space and its global flood catastrophe are young. Flood geologists have looked into this. Michael J. Ord is one of those. He's also an expert in meteorology and is the main proponent of the ice age caused by the global flood of Noah's day. He's also looked at this, and he's proposing that these rock layers, these folds and bends in the rocks, were caused by tectonic forces while the rocks were still underwater. Still underwater, probably around day 150 of the flood. If you're familiar with the flood chronology, most of us have heard in Sunday school 40 days and 40 nights of just continuous rainfall, and that is true. But there's also the fountains of the great deep that are bursting open from the bottom of the seafloor upward there. But then the waters maintain this maximum level till day 150, according to Genesis 7. Then after day 150, the waters start to come down, and they come down in two different ways, according to the Hebrew. And they don't come just vertically down slowly like that. They're moving very quickly downward and then back, and then downward and back. Just a drastic ebb and flow motion, back and forth. Genesis 8:3 tells us that. Then Genesis 8:5 says that then they started moving down, vertically downward quickly there. Okay? And it took 221 more days to do that. So we have 150 days of water activity and then 221 more days of drying off the earth. So the whole flood event lasted about 371 days, according to the Genesis chronology there. This rising, this bending of the rocks would have taken place about day 150 as the rocks are being moved upward from underwater. Okay? The evolutionists date that as Miocene on their evolutionary time scale. Those of you familiar with that? They date that 5 to 5.5 million years ago. But interestingly, all the major mountain ranges of the earth date the same age, even in the secular textbooks. There, we would say they happened at the end of the flood, or at the end of day 150. They would say millions of years ago. We would look at Psalm 104, verse 7 and 8, right? Talking about the floodwaters, says that they fled away at thy rebuke. They hastened away at the voice of thy thunder. The mountains rose up, the valleys sank down, and the waters went to the place that God has established for them so that they not return again to flood the earth. Talking about the floodwaters there on day 150. That's Psalm 104, 7 and 8, if you want to look that up. Roman numeral 2, recession of the moon indicates a recent history. The moon getting farther and farther from the earth. Okay, so we can back that up, reverse that, make it come closer and closer to the earth. Thanks to the gravitational pull of the moon, Earth's coastal seawaters are cleansed and their nutrients replenished regularly. You realize the tides cleanse our coastlands and keep our continental margins from being inundated with stagnant water. And they're cleansed twice a day. As the moon orbits the earth, its gravity pulls on the earth's oceans, causing tides. Since the earth rotates faster than the moon orbits, the tidal bulges induced by the moon are always ahead of the moon. There are actually two bulges that take place at the same time. There's a bulge on the moon side of the earth because the moon's gravity is pulling the Earth's crust toward the moon. That causes the oceans on that side to also bulge upward. But then on the far side of the Earth, that's also being pulled toward the moon. That causes kind of a depression on that side of the Earth that water rushes into and causes another bulge. So there are actually two bulges that are taking place at the same time. For this reason, the tides actually pull forward on the moon because the Earth's rotating faster than the moon is revolving, which causes the moon to gain energy and gradually spiral outward. The moon moves about 1.5 inches farther away from the Earth every year due to this tidal interaction. Thus, the moon would have been closer to the Earth in the past. You can see that, right? If it's getting farther away, 1.5 inches every year, then if you go back in time, it would have been closer 1.5 inches every year. Well, let's do the math on that one. If the Earth and the moon were over 4 billion years old, as Big Bang supporters teach, right? 4.6 billion is what they say. The moon would have been so close that it would actually have been touching the Earth less than 1.5 billion years ago, according to this source here at the bottom, giving an impossible scenario. This is Jason Lyle. He's an astronomer at ICR, and we have one of his DVDs on this topic in the back there. It says, long before that age, tidal inundations would have swept all soil from the Earth's continents due to increased gravitation from a closer moon. Closer moon, stronger gravitational pull, higher tides coming inland, and wiping the continents free of soil there. Earth-Moon system is young. Geologists actually calculate that you can erode all the continents down to sea level in about 14 million years based on today's erosion rates. Okay, and yet they say that some of these mountains, like the Rocky Mountains, uplifted around 65 million years ago. Well, why do we still have the Rocky Mountains if it only takes 14 million years to get them down to sea level? This is a schematic, a diagram showing you the tidal bulges. You see there are two light blue areas, one on the top and one on the bottom of the Earth. Those are the two bulges I was mentioning earlier there. And you see the arrows of the moon moving it farther away from the Earth there. The moon recession, 1.5 inches per year. Roman numeral 3, solar system alignment verifies a recent history. Without any indication of an internal dynamo to maintain its strength, like a generator, the magnetic field of Jupiter is extremely powerful. It's about 8 to 10 times the magnetic field of the Earth, the strength of the Earth. The fields of Uranus and Neptune are also quite strong. Not as strong as Earth's, okay? But about a fourth of that of Jupiter, actually. If, as secular astronomers believe, these planets are really billions of years old, their magnetic fields would be extremely weak by now. They're decaying also exponentially, just like Earth's magnetic fields decaying exponentially. So going back in time, they get stronger and stronger, and there are limits. Yet they are not. They're not actually extremely weak. They're still strong. A reasonable explanation for this is that the planets are only a few thousand years old. Okay, that would be an obvious kind of conclusion to come to. Late in 1993, planetary scientist George Wetherill of the Carnegie Institution of Washington, D.C., made an exciting discovery about our solar system. In observing computer simulations of our solar system, he found that without a Jupiter-sized planet positioned just where it is, so we need the size of Jupiter and the location of Jupiter, and that's exactly what we have, Earth would be struck about 1,000 times more frequently than it is already by comets and comet debris. Okay. Does your homeowner's insurance cover asteroid impact or comet impact or anything like that? If not, you can thank Jupiter. Okay. that we actually have to make those claims frequently. Jupiter, 2.5 times more massive than all the other planets combined. In fact, recently some astronomers are almost to the point of classifying Jupiter as a star because of its size. 2.5 times more massive than all the other planets combined, either draws comets by gravity to collide with itself, as it did in July 1994, or more commonly, it deflects comets right out of the solar system. So it's either acting as a vacuum cleaner to clean solar debris from the inner solar system, or it's acting as a slingshot, okay, to actually move debris out away from us. July 1994, anybody remember that? That was the Shoemaker-Levy 9 comet, which broke apart 2 years earlier in July 1992. It got too close to Jupiter. It was in with what's called the Roche limit. The Roche limit is how close you can get to a planet without the gravity of that planet breaking you apart there. Earth's Roche limit is about 11,500 miles. So the moon could have never been closer than that because the Earth would have broken the moon apart. Some of the rings around Saturn are thought to be satellites that have come too close to the planet, have been broken apart, and now their debris is orbiting the planet as the ring system there. Well, Jupiter's Roche limit is 108,000 miles from the planet's surface. So the Shoemaker-Levy 9 comet came within the 108,000 mile Roche limit. Jupiter's gravity broke the comet apart into 21 fragments, and then took the next pass, the next revolution around Jupiter to actually be pulled in. And Jupiter had 21 impacts there during July of 1994. It's quite spectacular. In Wetherell's words, if it were not for Jupiter, we wouldn't be around to study the origin of the solar system. Right? We would definitely need that on our homeowners policy. Their cometary impact. French astrophysicist Jacques Lasquer determined that if the outer planets were less orbitally regular, then the inner planets' motions would be chaotic, and Earth would suffer orbital changes so extreme as to disrupt its climatic stability. The inner planets he's talking about are those within the asteroid belt, right? Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars are considered the inner planets, and then those outside or past the asteroid belt are considered the outer planets. The outer planets, he says, their orbits are pretty regular there. They don't show what astronomers call too much perturbation, is the term that they use. Okay? They're pretty orderly. After all, we're talking about a cosmos, an orderly arrangement. Such precise alignment of the interrelated solar system indicates design and recency. It doesn't indicate randomness or chaos. Round number 4, young age of the sun displays a recent history. Writing in the respected British journal Nature, which is the premier science journal on the planet, from Great Britain, and America's, our premier is called Science, strictly Science. But this is from Nature. A team of Russian astronomers showed how their research pointed clearly to the startling fact that the sun does not even seem to possess a large, dense, burning core. That's pretty phenomenal, because most of our science books are teaching what this diagram shows up here, that in the center of the sun there's a region called the core, where the temperatures are about 27 million degrees Fahrenheit, 27 million degrees. Then there's the radiative zone, where radiation, electromagnetic waves are passing through. And then the convective zone, where gases are circulating in terms of ionized plasma. And then we get to the surface of the sun, which is called the photosphere, the ball of light, where the temperatures are incredibly frigid, 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay? 10,000 compared to 27 million in the core. Okay, this is the general teaching of the structure of the sun there. But if the sun doesn't possess a large, dense, burning core, then where is the supposed thermonuclear fusion taking place that supposedly generates the heat and light from the sun? Thermonuclear fusion is the idea that hydrogen atoms are being fused together, the nuclei are being fused together to form helium. And that tremendous energy is released in that whole process. But that has to have really high temperatures and really high pressures in order to do it. And so you would need a large, dense, burning core to do that. Well, is there any other explanation for how the sun can possibly generate its energy? And there is one. It's not popular among astronomers because it puts an upper limit for the age of the sun and actually makes the sun to be youthful. And it's called gravitational collapse. Gravitational collapse. That same scientist that I quoted earlier, John Eddy, he and a Boston mathematician named Aaron Bornasian years ago, they collected 400 years of solar eclipse data. Every time we have a total solar eclipse where our moon blocks the disk of the sun, and that's one of those signs God was talking about in Genesis 1:14, let them be for signs and for seasons and days and years. One of those signs is a total eclipse, because we're the only planet-moon system that can do that, by the way. Our sun is 400 times farther from the Earth than our moon, but our moon is 400 times smaller than our sun in diameter. there. And so from Earth's perspective, as circles in the sky, they look exactly the same size. Exactly. And so the moon can completely block the sun's disk, so that during a total solar eclipse, you see only the outer atmosphere of the sun, which is called the corona there. So for the last 400 years, one of the measurements that they do is the diameter of the sun. And so we can compare what the diameter of the sun 400 years ago is in recent time. And they have found that the sun's diameter seems to be shrinking at a rate of 5 feet per hour. 5 feet per hour. No big deal, really. Okay, when you consider that the diameter of the sun is around 868,000 miles across. Okay, 108 Earths side by side. That's how wide the sun is. Okay, so 5 feet per hour. That in 1,000 years, the sun would have shrunk 1%. So by the time we have from Adam to the present, our sun in Adam's day, Adam and Eve's day, would have been about 6% bigger. 6%. Right? Well, what happens if you go back 100,000 years? Not just 6,000. Let's go back 100,000 years. And we're going to add 5 feet in diameter to the sun. Okay? Go back 100,000 years. At the end of 100,000 years, our sun would be twice the size that it is now. It had been double in size. Well, let's keep going back in time. Let's keep adding 5 feet in diameter. And let's go back now 20 million years. Okay? Still a drop in the bucket to evolutionists, right? Because after all, they said the Earth's 4.5 billion, right? But if we go back 20 million, now we find out that the sun is actually touching the Earth. The sun's touching the Earth at 20 million years ago at this uniformitarian rate of 5 feet per hour there. How can that possibly be true? When did they say the dinosaurs, some of the dinosaurs made some of these footprints that we're finding? They said dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago there. But now we know why, right? They were barbecued in the core of the sun, which doesn't exist, right? That's what happened. No, we can tell all kinds of stories, couldn't we? Instead, their results showed the sun is bearing the characteristics of a very young, homogeneous star that corresponds with the early stages of computer models. The solar neutrino emission is that of a young star, and the lithium, beryllium abundance of the sun is consistent with that of a young star. Okay? Our sun's a pretty special star. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and call it a star. Okay? It's pretty special. It's very stable as a star. It doesn't have a really violent temper like other stars do. It does have solar flares. There are solar prominences, those kind of things. It's probably a seething cauldron, just like other stars would be. But it doesn't shoot out solar flares and prominences to the point where our planet is consumed. We're influenced by that, but we're not totally consumed by that. We're not vaporized by that. So that's what I mean when I say our sun is a pretty stable star. And that's important to keep life here on the Earth. The sun's also a solitary star. Most stars are double stars or binary stars, two stars that revolve around a common center of gravity. But ours is just a single star. And so we have a solar system that can kind of revolve around a star that keeps its position. And so that actually keeps the temperature just where it needs to be. There, the radiation just where it needs to be. Our sun also matches the rotational speed of the arm of the galaxy that we're located in. We're located in what's called the arm of Orion. Our whole solar system is in the arm of Orion of the spiral galaxy of the Milky Way. And our sun is keeping pace with the rate that the arm is spiraling around the center. So that keeps us within the galactic Goldilocks zone. There are two Goldilocks zones. There's one in the galaxy, and we are in that. And there's also one in the solar system, and we're in that one too. Do you think that's by accident? Don't think so. The sun has the right mass for the right luminosity to give us the right brightness also. And we have already seen the diameters just right too. Roman numeral 5, supernova, shell shock, and stars and galaxies echoes a recent history. Okay, now we're going to go way past the sun now. As reported by David Coppedge of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, in Pasadena, California, that monitors all of our probes, supernova remnants, SNRs for short, are shells of material expanding outward from stellar explosions. There are stars called novas, which means new star, which loses mass every time it explodes, and it explodes regularly over and over again. Each time it loses mass. Then there's a star called a supernova, which actually blows itself up and does not recover from the explosion. It actually ends up as a supernova remnant or a nebula, a cloud of gas or dust in space there. These SNRs are shells of material expanding outward from stellar explosions. In the case of RCW 86 and Centaurus, the calculated time of explosion was 10,000 years. That's what they calculated at JPL. Astronomers now realize it was witnessed, science is based on observation, it was witnessed by Chinese astronomers just 1,821 years ago. That puts us in the 2nd century AD. So that's when it really happened. That's within biblical chronology, right? 10,000 years would be a little bit past what the Bible is saying the age of the earth is. A pulsar thought to be 24,000 years old. Now, should that number cause us concern? 24,000 years? Well, yeah, right? If we believe that the Bible is teaching that the earth is only 6,000 years young, then anything over 6,000, it may be suspect. Where'd you get that age? How'd you calculate that date? A pulsar thought to be 24,000 years old was photographed by the Chandra telescope in 2003. Astronomers later realized it lined up with a supernova observed by the Chinese in AD 386. Light echoes from 2 ancient SNRs in the Large Magellanic Cloud were recently reported to be merely 410 and 610 years old. Much, much younger than what the astronomers had originally predicted, right? The Crab Nebula was witnessed by Chinese astronomers, again, in 1054 AD. That's also considered a supernova remnant. Expansion of the fabric of space, executed by the Creator himself. And it gives 2 references here, but he's going to give you a little bit more later on. There are 17 verses in the Old Testament that talk about God stretching out the heavens or expanding the space fabric. Okay. Expansion of the fabric of space accounts for the larger deep time and deep space, all within a recent time frame of a few thousand years. Okay. So going back to the very beginning, the title of the presentation, Deep Time and Deep Space. Biblically, what's the answer to that? Or what's a possible scenario? And the Bible had already laid it out for us, that God is the one who has stretched the fabric of space, and that does have consequences, okay, which we can measure even today. Roman numeral 6, technical research correlates deep time, universal recent history. The speed of light in a vacuum has been calculated at 186,000 miles per second, supposedly requiring vast time to reach the Earth from distant galaxies. I told you earlier, we would talk about a light year a little later. Here we are. All right? A light year is not a time unit. A light year is a distance unit of how far light can travel going this speed, 186,282 miles per second in 1 year. It can travel about 6 trillion miles going at that speed in 1 year. Comes out to be 5.88 trillion miles. We'll round off to 6 trillion miles to make it easy. Okay, so 1 light year is 6 trillion miles. Consequently, critics have faulted the Bible as being scientifically untenable and describing a recent 6-day creation of the entire universe. They're saying the universe is 13.8 billion years, which means they believe it has a diameter of at least 13.8 billion years. And the light's been traveling for 13.8 billion years. Based on this calculation. So how can you Christians be right that the Bible is saying it's only 6,000 years? You see the problem? Well, there's an answer. Creation has answers. How do we explain this apparent conflict between Scripture and science? For our readers who have a technical background, Associate David Bassett, he looks pretty familiar, has described one of the scientific approaches in the following abbreviated form. Dr. Baugh used an article I wrote years ago here. This is D. Russell Humphreys. The D stands for David. David Russell Humphreys. The model which best answers this challenge to date is the cosmology proposed by Dr. D. Russell Humphreys, well-known young Earth creationist and nuclear physicist employed at Sandia National Laboratories, New Mexico since 1979. Let's go back, okay? This is quiz time now. What's a cosmology? Notice he didn't use the word cosmogony there in the quote. Cosmology. That was the scientific study of the cosmos, right? So this is actually based on astronomy, observational astronomy. And then young Earth creationists. We used to be called YECs, young Earth creationists. But now the new term for us are biblical creationists. I like that better. Biblical creationists are those who believe in an Earth universe system of 6,000 to 10,000 years. And D. Russell Humphrey is definitely one of those. His model is explained at both layman and technical levels in his popular book, which we carry in the back, Starlight in Time, Solving the Puzzle of Distant Starlight in a Young Universe. Dr. Humphrey's young Earth cosmology is based upon physics and mathematics totally accepted by most cosmologists. In the book, in the appendix, he has 2 appendices in the book which give you the detailed math. And you may want to skip those chapters if you're not into that kind of stuff. Two chapters that show the calculus equations and all that. Some people need that information to actually even consider creation science to be true science. But the first part of the book, the majority of the book, is written in ordinary language that all of us would understand. It requires no manipulating of data, his model. There's no fudge factors, there's no propping up, there's no secondary assumptions, he didn't have to manipulate data. The results easily issue forth from the equations. 3, explains all the observations erroneously used to support the Big Bang. So he's actually giving the scientific counter-arguments to what's usually used to support the Big Bang, including the cosmic microwave background radiation, progressive redshift, and the past expansion of space. Those are the 3 legs to the stool that hold up the Big Bang. Those 3 right there. Cosmic microwave background radiation, which is not as smooth and uniform as the evolutionists originally predicted. Progressive redshift, which they believe is based on distance and not age. And the past expansion of space, without compromising the astronomical evidence of the clear biblical teaching of a young Earth. You notice it says past expansion of space, not present expansion of space. Whenever the scriptures mention God stretching the heavens, it's always in the past tense there, as far as the creation week is concerned and as far as the flood year is concerned. Those two different times is when we had space expansion. There is one of the 17 verses that deals with the future, and since it's found in Psalms, and it's asking God to bow down the heavens, okay, which he's going to do when we get to Revelation chapter 6. Number 4 has passed peer review. Is that important for scientists? Definitely. Okay, we got to have objective opinions, other people doing the research, getting the same results we're getting, so that way it's not biased. We're not just promoting it, just one person promoting this idea. It's gone through testing. It's gone through experimentation. It's been criticized, right, by qualified reviewers for the 1994 Pittsburgh International Conference on Creationism. Has successfully, number 5, withstood the opposition of critics, okay, both creation critics and evolutionary critics, with further development actually ensuing from its defense, albeit additional future refinements may be necessary as dictated by observational data. Again, that's the key, right, to science, observational data. The model makes the opposite starting point assumption of the Big Bang hypothesis, namely that the universe is bounded with a center at or near the Earth and an edge beyond which matter is absent. I got to go back. Okay, lots of information in that sentence there. The Big Bangers don't believe that Earth is anything special, that we're not located in any place that's special in the solar system or in the galaxy, that we are where we are just strictly by accident, just by this cosmic explosion that supposedly took place around 14 billion years ago. And they believe the universe would be infinite, has no outer edge to it, has no center, definitely not, because that would be a special place, right, the center. And so this is called the cosmological principle, sometimes referred to as the Copernican principle there, which is the Big Bang prediction. None of these predictions have been verified. Okay? In fact, they've all been falsified now for the last 20 or 30 years. This implies a net gravitational effect toward the center with general relativity of Einstein, the theory that gravity distorts time, demanding that time near the edge be accelerated relative to Earth-based time at or near the center. A relativistic concept known as gravitational time dilation. Okay, whoa, let's back up. Einstein had two theories of relativity. He had special theory of relativity, which dealt with the speed of light, which he said was the maximum speed in the universe. At that time, he believed in a vacuum of space. And we'll say biblically a little bit later on in the presentation that cannot possibly be true, that space is a vacuum, a nothingness. But he believed that at that time that it was a nothingness, and that light somehow traveled through this nothingness at 186,000 plus miles per second, and that mass could not go faster than that. Okay? And then he came up about 10 to 12 years later with general relativity, which is the idea that gravity distorts both space and time, which he called space-time, which he believed was a fourth dimension there. He would not say gravity was a force. He would say gravity is the natural consequence of mass deforming a space fabric there, because by the time he got to general relativity, he scrapped the idea that space was a vacuum. He believed in the concept of an ether, okay, which we'll see that word coming up also. Okay, a space medium. Just think of it as a space medium, an electromagnetic medium. So it'd be like a bowling ball on a rubber sheet. And the rubber sheet would bend and deform under the weight of the bowling ball there. So then if I rolled a little BB close enough to the bowling ball, it would tend to start moving down into this little depression, this little deformity caused by the heavy mass on this rubber sheet there. So he would say, well, it wasn't the big mass pulling the little mass, it was the little mass behaving naturally because the fabric that it's rolling on is deformed downward. Okay, so that would be Einstein's view of gravity. Relative to a point in distant space, Earth time would have been virtually frozen with no effect whatsoever to the Earth-based observer at or near the center of this massive cosmic time dilation event. If you're lost, let me see if I can get you back on track. He's believing, and D. Russell Humphreys, this is what we're talking about now, not Einstein anymore. D. Russell Humphreys and astronomers have confirmed the idea that we're living in what they call a galactocentric universe. That our galaxy, the Milky Way, is at or very near the center of the physical universe there. And so we are actually the center of a gravity well there. Everything else is moving away from us in all directions, moving away from our galaxy there. So as gravity is distorting time farther and farther away from us, and the more that space fabric is stretched, the more time accelerates. The faster things are aging, the farther we get away from the Earth. This is what this concept teaches there. But here on the Earth, where our space is not being stretched because we're near the center, our time clocks are not affected by this. So we're actually registering real time, 6,000 years of real time, whereas as space fabric is being stretched more and more and more away from us, time is accelerating faster and faster and faster, so that there may be billions of years of aging far, far away from us, but only thousands of years of real time here. This is the concept of gravitational or cosmic time dilation. In other words, while less than an ordinary day would be passing on the Earth, millions, if not billions of years of deep time would be registering in a deep space frame of reference. So this is not a black hole idea. This is a white hole idea, okay, of expansion, not contraction. Okay, the whole black hole relativistic concept is that black holes pull everything inward. D. Russell Humphreys is accepting what he calls a white hole cosmology. Scripture provides the explanation for deep time, universal history, whereas the relativistic prediction of gravitational time dilation has been upheld by both radio wave experimental results done in 1965 and 1975, and atomic clock experimental results, 1969 and 1971. Get this, to within 1% confirmation. That's exceedingly good. Anything less than 5%, it's considered scientifically acceptable. So within 1%, that's pretty good confirmation. The past expansion of space by the Creator, not present expansion, past expansion is supported, more importantly, by the written Word of God in at least 17 verses of the Old Testament. Why is it more importantly? Because we consider the Word of God to be the higher authority than scientific experiments. than even our own observation, right? Even Peter said, when he was present there at the transfiguration of Christ, he witnessed that Christ was transfigured, and then he wrote in his epistles that he had a more sure word of prophecy, that the word of God was even more sure than his own eyewitness observation of what had happened there. And so we hold Scripture to a really high place here, taking it literally. Those 17 biblical references in the Old Testament comprise 18 occurrences utilizing the following 4 Hebrew verbs. And those are in italics. You can kind of maybe see those. The word natah, N-A-T-A-H, 15 times of the 18 is that word. That's the most frequent word, used for stretching or spreading. Then we have rakah, used one time in 2 Samuel. Matak, the Hebrew word, used one time in Isaiah 40. And then tafak, one time in Isaiah 48. Isaiah 48:13, that last reference, God says that he has spanned the heavens with his right hand. Okay? And so the word spanned in English is this Hebrew word matak. This is the span right here. Okay, if you're a 6-foot man, 6 foot in height, your span is about 9 inches across. That's as far as your little finger can get away from your thumb. Yeah, that's the span right there. It's about 9 inches or so. God has said the entire universe fits within the span of his right hand. Okay, so that's what this verse is saying. Isaiah 48:13. This truth of the heavens having been stretched or spread out, and the word natah, that's used 15 times, can be translated either stretched or spread. Is there a difference between stretched and spread? The translators are pretty consistent with this. Remember earlier I said there were 2 types of firmaments? There were spaces, which were heavens, and then there were dividers between those heavens, which were faces or surfaces. And usually the translators, when they're talking about stretching the space, they use the word stretch. They stretched out the heavens. But then when the face is being mentioned, the word spread is used instead of stretch. And I noticed when I was doing my study on this, the scriptures are really consistent with this, and the translators are really consistent with this. This truth of the heavens having been stretched, if it's a space, or spread out, if it's a face, also communicates to us the reality that our current secular concept of space is faulty. What's our current secular concept of space? It's a vacuum, right? That's actually taught in some Christian school science curriculum. Because I used to have a textbook. I'm a Christian educator teaching science, and we used to have a curriculum that actually taught that space was a vacuum. We can't do that anymore. We have to say, no, it's an electromagnetic medium. It's made up of magnetic fields and electric fields. It's not just a nothingness. Okay? D. Russell Humphreys, I think will convince you of this here in this next quote. Consider Dr. D. Russell Humphreys' biblically based insights regarding the nature of space itself. I like this guy as a scientist because he starts with the Bible. He reads everything the Bible has to say about the topic that he's investigating, and then he builds his scientific model on the Bible. And I think that every scientist should do that. This is what he's found. Generally, we think of space as a vacuum, an empty volume. But how can a nothingness be stretched out as if it were a something, like a tent curtain? Psalm 104 verse 2 talks about God stretching the heavens like a curtain or a tent to dwell in. To get a clue, notice how Scripture speaks of other things happening to the heavens. The heavens can be torn, worn out like a garment, shaken, burnt up, split apart like a scroll when it's rolled up, and rolled up like a mantle or a scroll. It certainly sounds like space itself is a material of some sort. Right? It's not a nothingness. It's some type of fabric medium. It may not be made out of matter. It may just be made out of energy or some type of field presence there, but it's not just the nothingness. The most comprehensive treatise on the properties of such an all-pervading electromagnetic ether, the term that Einstein used, space fabric is what we're using now, is, however, the revolutionary book Space Medium, The Key to Unified Physics, Dr. Thomas Barnes's book. Okay, the man who first gathered all the data on the decay of the Earth's magnetic field. Right? He died in 1985, October of 85. This is me pictured with him over 30 years ago. He is in the center. His wife, Libby, is over here to the right side. There's a painting of him, a portrait of him on the wall. it got kind of cut off, but there's a portrait of her on the other side there, and that's me standing in the green next to Dr. Barnes there. I met him when I was in college at the University of Texas, El Paso, under an unfortunate circumstance, because as a geology major, I was asking questions in class about young Earth, about things I was learning at the time as a young Christian and as just a blossoming creationist at the time. I was getting data from the Institute for Creation Research, and then I would ask the questions in class to see how my professors would respond. And if you were here this morning, Dr. Ball was talking about about professors basically just ignoring those questions, telling the student stay on topic and then moving on. My professors basically said, we're not going to answer that. That opens a whole can of worms. And then he went on to something else. Okay? I asked about pleochroic halos, which may not mean anything to you. These are radiation damage zones in crystals of granites, which form the core of the continents. As creationists, we would consider them day 3 rocks, the very first rocks that God made out of water. Because you know, the early Earth, the day 1, day 2 Earth, was all liquid water, according to 2 Peter chapter 3. And that God made rock out of water. And then when God did that, he did it instantaneously. And he placed crystal damage in the solid rock there, and radioactive isotopes, which have half-lives of billions of a second there. There's one radioactive isotope in the black crystals of granite. If you're familiar with granite, it has clear quartz and pink feldspar and black biotite mica flecks there. The Texas State Capitol is made out of granite there. And if you look at the black flecks with a microscope, go deeper, you'll see little zircon crystals, and in those are radiation damage of an isotope called polonium-214. Dr. Ball used to talk more about polonium-214 there. It has a half-life, the time it takes for half the isotope to decay, of 0.000164 seconds. So in less than 2/1000th of a second, half the polonium-214 is already gone, changed into something else. Okay? It can only show that if you have a solid crystal. If the granite is truly an igneous rock that cools from a lava, which has never been proved in the laboratory, that you wouldn't even have that evidence. That evidence has to be in solid rock. That means the rock had to be solid within 2/1000ths of a second. Now, do lavas cool that fast? No, they don't. Which means God spoke solid rock into existence, and then he left his signature in those crystals. Okay? And so some people say that granite is a theogenic rock. It has a God origin. When we actually take the 3 minerals that I just mentioned that make up granite, and we melt them together, and we mix them, and then we wait for them to solidify, they don't solidify as a granite. They solidify as a different igneous rock called a diorite. And so we don't know how granite forms naturally, to be honest. Okay? Maybe God just has to speak granite into existence. Okay? I think that's exactly what he did. But Dr. Barnes is saying that this space medium is both reactive and propagative, which means light can pass through it. Okay? Which means light must be an electromagnetic wave. Barnes showed mathematically that this space fabric solely consists of elementary electric and magnetic fields. It's an electromagnetic phenomenon and is therefore massless, non-inertial, and non-mechanical. This is from his book, Space Medium, yet totally consistent with the laws of classical physics. If you ever had the opportunity to meet Dr. Barnes, he believed in classical physics. This is Newtonian physics of Isaac Newton. He did not believe in Einsteinian physics or relativity or quantum mechanics or any of that, what we call modern physics of today. He believed you could explain all of physics with just electricity and magnetism, those 2 forces. Okay? And of course, there's institutions, there's one in Minnesota that's actually built to do scientific experiments just with classical physics only. Nuclear physicist Gerald Schroeder, he actually believes in the relativity, just like D. Russell Humphreys does. That's okay. Author of Genesis and the Big Bang, has suggested that the expansion factor is well known from a number of quantum physics considerations as approximately 10 to the 12th, a 1 with 12 zeros. That's a trillion. So now we're going to talk about, well, how fast was the stretching of this ether, of this space medium. Applying this to a supposed Big Bang deep time age of 16 billion years, dividing by 10 to the 12th, results in the amazing time of only 0.016 years, or 5.844 days. Now, they don't say the universe is 16 billion years old. When I was in school, though, as a student at the university over 30 years ago, they were saying the universe was 20 billion years old. Okay? I'm not sure, maybe some of you remember that in your science class. 20 billion years. And then they launched the Hubble Space Telescope. And the Hubble Space Telescope has, believe it or not, cut 1/3 off the age of the universe. So now they've had to reduce it down to close to 14 billion. So the universe has gotten 6 billion years younger, while I've gotten over 30 years older. Okay? Okay. So if you divide, let's say, 14 billion years, closer to what the Big Bangers are actually saying, if you divide 14 billion years, you calculate the number of days in 14 billion years, and you divide it by a trillion. Okay? And this is what you're going to get. Okay? 13.8 billion times 365.25 days per year, and you're going to get about 5 trillion days. Almost exactly 5 trillion days. And then, of course, you divide that by a trillion, you get 5. Okay, 5 days there. He's using 16 billion, he's gotten 5.8. But if you use close to 14, it gets closer to actually 5.0 days. Now, why is that important? Well, if the space fabric was starting to be stretched on day 2, when God made a firmament to divide the waters above from the waters below, second heaven, and he called that firmament heaven, Genesis 1:8, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. So by the end of day 6, the heavens would have been fully expanded out by the end of creation week. I think that's why Genesis 2:1 says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their host," okay, not continually being expanded. Now there were 2 verses earlier, they're mentioned right here, this next slide, where 1,656 years later, after creation, 1,656 years, the time between creation and the flood, according to Genesis chapter 5. And there's another slight expansion event that takes place. This is of interest to me as a geologist because some years ago, from 1997 to 2005, an 8-year period of time, ICR did a radiometric dating study called the RATE program. RATE was, R-A-T-E, was an acronym, stood for radioactivity and the age of the Earth. And at the end of the 8-year study, they determined that there were 2 times when radioactive decay was accelerated, when the decay rates were greatly accelerated, more than 1 billion times faster than normal. And that was during creation week and during the beginning of the flood. And this is exactly the 2 times when space was expanded as well. Okay, so maybe there's a relationship between space expansion and radiometric decay rates. But here are the 2 verses, 2 Samuel 22 and Psalm 18. If you look those 2 passages up, they're almost word for word identical. They're talking about the flood. So we have 4000 BC, and then according to Usher's chronology, around 2350 BC for the flood. So while time within the past few thousand years from creation to the present proceeded at its normal pace on Earth, remember, we're in the gravity well, so our space is not affected by stretching. The rapid stretching of space fabric by the Creator matured mass, made things older, and dilated time in deep space, accelerated time. The farther out you go. How awesome are the ways of God, he says. Okay, so that concludes that presentation. And at this juncture, let me just mention to you, this was a prediction of D. Russell Humphreys. Back in the 1970s, we launched Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 to the outer gas giant planets. And evolutionists made their predictions of what the magnetic field strengths would be for Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus and Neptune. And D. Russell Humphreys was making his predictions also. And then we had to wait. And then we had to wait. And then we had to wait for Voyager to get there. And it took some time to get there. We're talking millions and millions of miles away. And then the data started coming back there. And they found out that the evolutionary range of predictions was at best 100,000 times off. At worst, they were 1 billion times off. 10 to the 5th to 10 to the 9th power off. And D. Russell Humphreys was within 4.4% there. He was spot on within the 5% accuracy, error for accuracy there. They're like, well, you're just a dumb creationist, right? You're not a real scientist, right? How'd you get the right answer? He did the same thing for Earth. He calculated it for Earth, and I'll answer the question how he got the answer in just a moment. But the mathematically derived value, the theoretical value, based on equations for magnetic field strength of the Earth, he calculated at 1.41 times 10 to the 24th power joules per Tesla. And then we actually did the experiments, gathered the data, looked at all the numbers, and it came out actually to be, remember he calculated 1.41 times 10 to the 24th power. It came out to be 1.47 times 10 to the 24th power. He was 4.255% off. 4.255%, less than 5%. Whoa. With the Voyager data, he was 4.4% off, as I told you earlier, still within 5%. This remarkable agreement within 5% provides exciting supporting evidence for the following concepts. These were the only assumptions he used. 1, an all-water day one Earth. He believed that the day one Earth was all 100% liquid water. No evolution is going to assume that. 2, Humphreys assumed an exponential decay for the original magnetic field. Okay, that's going to be decaying at an exponential rate. And then 3, he assumed a 6,000-year biblical time scale, okay, based on the scriptures there. Those are the only 3 assumptions he used to get the data that he came up with. So he's saying that the planets and the Earth all started off as liquid water bodies originally, 6,000 years ago, with their magnetic fields decaying. You may think, well, wait a minute. How are you having magnetic fields if your planet is water? Is water magnetic? Well, it is if you can get all the water molecules lined up in the same direction. Okay, this is called the domain theory in physics. Each molecule is a magnet because it's a charged particle in motion. We have electrons that we say are negatively charged. Protons are positively charged. They're rotating. Electrons, we believe, are revolving if our model of the atom is correct. And so we have charged particles in motion that generates magnetic fields. So each molecule is a magnetic field, a magnetic particle. But if you can put all the water molecules, line up all the hydrogen atoms, the H2O, all in the same direction in our water mass, presto, we reinforce magnet at the same direction. We've got a huge magnetic field. By the end of day one, we believe that the Earth was a sphere of water with a magnetic field around it. It was rotating on an axis. The evening and the morning were day one. Well, what causes the water molecules to line up? Got to back up in the verse a little bit. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters there. The Spirit of God imposing that kind of organization on that water, on the liquid water Earth, caused it to generate a magnetic field. And then once it was generated, and then basically it was allowed to start decaying. Okay? Probably might have to wait till the time of the curse to start decaying. But it starts decaying exponentially. Barnes's model is called the free decay theory. Barnes's model has been improved upon by D. Russell Humphreys. Barnes did not include the energy drained out of the magnetic field based on the flood, based on those reversals we were talking about earlier. D. Russell Humphreys says the reversals, for a long time creationists were saying they weren't, but the data indicates that they are. So he had to deal with them. And then he has calculated how much energy was taken out of the Earth's magnetic field in the one-year flood. And so now we have the magnetic field of the Earth decaying even faster than what Barnes calculated it to be, which puts the age even younger for planet Earth. So he says here, the fact that all these factors, the composition of the Earth, the exponential decay, the time, must dovetail, must all come together to produce this tight agreement of 4.25%, increases the overall likelihood that this is a correct explanation for the origin of the Earth's electromagnetic field. The evolutionists have nothing better. 100,000 billion times off based on their age calculations, whereas the creationists, believing in a 6,000 all-water Earth, came out to almost have the exact number, okay, that was measured. Okay. Dr. Barnes had a pamphlet when he was alive. He published a pamphlet, and on the cover it says, "Creationists are the better scientists." There. I sent that picture to Dr. Baugh. Notice he didn't use it, Mark. I'm not sure what he did with that. But creationists are the better scientists. All the scientific disciplines were started by creationists. And we have that documented in the back over here on the wall. At this point, Dr. Baugh usually takes 3 questions from the audience. This is the scary part for the speaker because we don't know what you're going to ask. Okay? So if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, we'll take 3 questions. He limits it to 3 so we can actually get out on time, and we do close at 4. So, any questions? I know this is a lot of information. A lot of it might have been like here, there. We have Jason Lyle's DVD in the back. We have D. Russell Humphrey's book in the back also. And oh, yes, ma'am? First Peter 3:8.
That a year in the Bible for God is like a...
Yeah, it says 1 day is with the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. Is that the verse you're talking about?
Thought that a year for God or something different. That so 6,000 years was different.
Okay, that verse, 1 Peter 3:8, is in a context talking about the return of the Lord. Okay, the 1 Peter 3:4 says, "Where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were." Okay, so basically Peter is predicting the rise of uniformitarianism, the idea that the present is the key to the past. And so these scientists are saying, well, we haven't seen Jesus in our lifetime. You know, past generations basically haven't seen Jesus in their lifetime and within recent history. And so since the present is the key to the past, you know, there is going to be no return of the Lord. Where's the promise of his coming? So the context is not a creation context. The context is a prophecy context. And it kind of goes along with what the Jewish rabbis call the millennial day theory. This is also mentioned in Psalm 90, okay, which is written by Moses. And this idea holds that God's plan for earth is 6 1,000-year days under man's dominion, and then a final 7th 1,000-year day under the reign of Christ. Okay, a Sabbath rest under Christ. That's the millennial day concept there. So if we hold to a 6,000-year earth, that's basically under man's dominion. And then we're expecting the day of the Lord, which is not a literal 24-hour solar day. It's actually more like a 1,000-year period of time, which most Christians call the millennium. Okay, so that's still coming. It's still future. Originally, what I thought you were going to ask is where the years shorter or longer there, because in that too, in Genesis 7, it talks about 5 months in the flood passage, and then in Genesis 8, it mentions the same 5 months, but it calls it 150 days. And so we had 30-day months, right? And so a year would be 360 days long, which is why the ancients had 360 degrees in a circle. Okay, they had a base 60 system there. But it might be possible that the days were actually a little longer in that time period, because biologists have looked at circadian rhythms, life rhythms of living organisms, and have found out that they average about 24.35 hours. Not exactly 24, 24.35 hours. Well, if you get a calculator and you go 360 times 24.35, that's equal to the same total as 24-hour days times 365.25. Exactly. So that means that the revolution rate of the Earth around the sun has not changed. Okay, it's still the same revolution period there. just a matter of shortening the length of the days, but adding a few more days in the year. Okay. All right, good. Good question. Two-part question. All right. Other questions?
I want to speak a little bit on, from observational science, when there's an explosion, all the particles have a spin. And so if the Big Bang Theory and the whole thing that we were taught in school about the formation of the solar system were true, you would expect all the things to be spinning in the same order, but how do they account for the fact that some of the planets spin differently, some of even the moons spin differently, there's different rotations instead of...
I have not heard of a good explanation for that. The whole Big Bang violates the conservation of angular momentum, as well as the first and second laws of thermodynamics, as well as the law of cause and effect, which are basic scientific laws. The Big Bang is scientifically illegal. But everything radiating out from a central point explosion should be going out linearly, all directions radially, like that. So what actually causes matter to come together, to form planets, to form suns, to form galaxies, and especially galaxies that rotate, like you were saying. Planets that rotate, our own solar system have planets that rotate in what we consider the west to east direction normally, but then there's retrograde rotation of a couple of planets. Venus is one of those. How does that happen? We have planets that are oriented with certain axis of rotation, and then planets that are on their sides, spinning on their sides. I think God did that on purpose, just to make it extremely difficult for them to come up with a natural explanation of the solar system. So that way Romans 1:20 would still be true, right? That they can study the creation and be without excuse when they come to this conclusion, when they come to their conclusion. I think scientists are going to be held to a higher standard because they're the teachers. They're teachers also. The book of James says teachers are going to be held to a higher standard at the judgment there. And one scary verse in the gospel says that any teacher that leads a child astray, woe unto you, right? It's better for you to have a millstone hung around your neck and be cast into the sea than to cause a child to stumble, especially in their faith there. And when you think of how many false teachers we have teaching doctrines that are leading people away from God there, we have a lot of accounting to do. So we need to be praying for these people. Hopefully I didn't give you the idea that evolutionists are the enemy. They're not. Evolutionism, the philosophy, the doctrine, that's what we're attacking, not the people themselves. A lot of them are deceived. There are some, I think, that are purposely propagating a false gospel there, but for the most part, they grew up in public school, state university. This is all they've been taught. They may not have heard of an alternative way of interpreting scientific data there, and they're just doing the best they can. So we need to be out reaching people, and a lot of creationists have come to know the Lord and know about creation science because their students have challenged them. A lot of professors have been challenged by students who are respectful, who held the teacher in authority, but came after class and said, well, have you ever considered this? Have you done research into this topic? And then I know of a few instances, 180, they're even turning their backs on their life's work to follow intelligent design or creation science or something of that nature. So we really need to be praying for those people. Satan has blinded their minds, right? 2 Corinthians 4:4 says that. So, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
It's actually a comment. On the comment about a day, 1,000 years,
Mm-hmm.
1,000 years a day.
Yes.
You can also turn to, I believe, if I'm correct, Exodus 20 verse 3. It says that the earth was created in 6 days.
20 verse 11.
Okay.
Exodus 20:11, the fourth commandment. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Absolutely correct there on that one. So yeah, everything was created, made, and formed within the 6-day period. And then you use biblical chronologies, genealogies, and event-to-event chronology to establish that literal week was actually 6,000 years ago or so. So that's the way you would do it as far as biblical chronology. And that has the authority of not just the Word of God, your verse you mentioned there, but also God's finger, and Him actually inscribing it Himself in tablets of stone. So yeah, that's when we basically say the days are not literal days. I've heard this argument too. Maybe you have too. A lot of compromise positions. Let's just say the days of creation were 1,000 years long. Okay, and no evolution is going to buy that either. Okay, let's just say that they were, and we say Adam clearly was made on day 6. I don't think there's any disagreement with that. Okay, that's what scriptures say. Well, let's say if Adam was made at the beginning of day 6, and day 6 was 1,000 years long, how old did Adam live? 930 years. He would have been dead by the end of day 6. Okay? If he was created at the end of day 6, then he would have died on the day that God was resting on day 7. There, so we still got a problem there. And there's just no way to actually compromise Genesis with evolution without doing damage to Genesis or evolution. They're just totally different. Even the order is different. So you can't just expand the days because the order of events are totally different. Okay? So the best approach is to believe that God meant what he said, and he said what he meant, and take Scripture literally. And when science does that, we're all the better for it.